Here's a basic overview of working with Adobe InDesign Grid Lines. This is content brought over from an infographic into an ebook. Let's go page by page. You can see here we have now a matching grid, equilateral on both sides. It's about 1.125 on the left and 1.125 on the right side. The challenge is that when you have a text box like this that was kind of plopped in here on this grid, originally we wanted to create something here so that we can add captions on the right side, so forth and so on. But seeing as we want to make it as balanced as we can, I will create this balance on either side in the InDesign document. And I'll take this text document now and flow it over to the actual grid lines. Now we can go over the grid lines, but you see the text goes over the grid lines. And you see the little widow here on the word return. That creates a problem there. If we try to go a little bit before it, it reflows it. But you can see how it automatically reflows. And that's the challenge when dealing with these grids. Same thing if we go justified format instead of left, it creates weird spacing between the letters. Yes, it lines up, but it creates awkward spacing and more widows. So it's sort of like you can't win. So you have to come up with sort of a clever in-between. So what we can do is make this grid equilateral like it is there. And then we can start to play around with how we lay this out, but now we get into customization. So what I mean by that is we do an actual soft return here so that we don't have these widows and it kind of flows nicely. But you can see if we look at this on the blue grid, you actually see the actual blue lines there. And then if we go up to view, we go to screen mode, I'm stuttering there, screen mode, we go to preview, you don't see the blue lines. And so what happens sometimes is that then it looks odd to the naked eye, without the blue lines. But that's one of the challenges here with the challenge applies here on this page here when we have tables. Again, we have the blue line grid here that we've arranged to be equilateral on both sides. So basically, if I draw a box, I'll see a black box there and a black box here, it is equilateral, meaning that it's the same distance on either side. So one of the challenges here now is that when you're making capitalization of headlines, you can see how it'll change the whole look and feel of the page. And we have a reflow issue here because it's reduction in, and then there's this awkward gap, and then we come down to recordable incidents. So to avoid that, you go upper lowercase so that it's more of a flow. But again, you run into the same problem because you have reduction in recordable incidents or reduction in recordable and then incidents. Either way, you're going to have this odd widow there. That's why it's really, really important to think about writing document text or document content as document content. This content here came from an infographic, so we're trying to use infographic text, which is simple headlines, into a document, and that just doesn't work often. So for example, we might say something like reduction in recordable incidents. I might work with my editor or do myself to say something like the importance of reduction in recordable incidents. See, I'm playing around with the text a little bit, or the reduction in many recordable incidents. I'm just saying how it fills in. We just have to get creative with editing to make it look a little bit more appropriate. So that's one of the challenges there. Thinking of headlines and text and content. So what we're going to do here now that we've made the blue lines a little more equilateral is I'm going to grab this content here and I'm going to bump this over to the right so that it lines up perfectly, like a razor's edge here. Adobe InDesign has a function where they call it smart guides, where it more or less clicks on the grid, so you really can't mess with that. So what we can try to do here is make the gray box, for example, line up perfectly on the blue grid, and the same with this dark gray or black box down here. We can line that up Same with this. So the little subtext here, we'll line that up on the left here, like so. And then what we can do is view this in, we'll change the view. We'll go to view. We'll go to screen mode to preview. And again, without the blue lines, sometimes it plays tricks on your eyes, right? Because you're like, well, wait a minute, there's more space over here than here. Or, you know, can't we bump words over? Yes, we can. But look what happens. It creates more odd spaces. You see what happens when we kick that back? It has a real awkward angle to it now. So it may seem like we can change that, but what we got to do is, or what we have to do is customize it so that it just becomes a little bit more appropriate looking. Otherwise it looks silly. So then there's a question, well, let's just bump our down instead of. But you got to think of the reader. So when you're reading through this, the most important benefit of fewer recordable incidents is more of our friends and coworkers. You're kind of reading through it so it has a nicer flow to it. So that's one of the reasons you do that. But now that you're viewing it in actual preview mode, now we can play around with these little lines and make things line up a little bit better. So again, visually, it's equilateral on both sides. Things now, the danger is that when you start messing with guides, so we change the guides on this page, which is going to affect all pages because all pages are now going to have the same exact grid pattern. So we changed this. Now we have to go to all the other pages and do the same kind of thing. And this isn't a perfect science. Again, we're working with content and text that came directly from an infographic as opposed to writing text for an actual document, which I can show you later. But in this case here, now that we have all these grid lines changed, we have to move all of this stuff down. We have to start on the left here to make sure that this all lines up perfectly. And now it goes way off the blue grid line. So watch what happens now if we change this, if we try to line it up. Because again, if I go to change my view and I have screen mode going to preview, it looks odd here. You're like, well, it doesn't match up. I want it to match up. So when we do that, see how the words kick down. See, which isn't terrible here, but see how it jumps down there and creates that little widow word, profound, down at the bottom. We don't want that. So it's very, very tricky, very, very tricky. So you think, oh, that looks pretty good right there, right? So let's go back to our other view, and you can see it is not lined up on the blue line. So if you want these things to be equilateral and lined up, we play around with this, we create a new problem where it kicks down. So sometimes you have to break the blue line. You have to break the rule to make things flow better like this so that it reads better. That's one of the benefits to having a left justified layout so that you have the ragged right justification over there. Otherwise, if we try to go to full justified, we create, again, some weird issues with spacing. See, it fills in the spacing of all the letters, and it looks wacky. See the spacing between the letters? Not good. So we have to keep it left justified, and we have to make a decision now. Do we want to kick this down lower and go 4 lines, or do we want to keep it at 3 lines? You see, every decision you make up chain affects everything down chain. So now we have to decide, do we want it 4 lines or do we want to have it 3 lines? And that can be challenging if you have too many cooks in the kitchen, because some people like it this way, some people like it this way, some people like it all caps, some don't. It can get very, very challenging. So we do the best we can to sort of customize it. Now in this case here, I would prefer going with the of here, kick that down a line. But now the challenge is going to be this. We have the blue line, and you want to keep everything lined up on these lines. So now let's say we want to make this box lined up here. And you can see we have all of this text here in this box. So what do we do? What do we do with the box? Well, there's a couple things we can do. We can group it together, and we can make it smaller. We can make this whole box smaller so that it fits on your blue lines. Make everything lined up. So if you think it looks awkward, okay, we can do that. So let's say we line that up. But now we have this issue here again with the text, because now the text is going beyond the box. So what do? You make that go down to the next line. Now let me just point this out. If we change the text on this, that's going to affect all the other pages because we have to change the size of the text on all the boxes throughout is consistent. The size we do here is the same size that we do throughout this whole entire document. So now you're creating a new problem because now we're going to look at this and say, oh, this text is smaller than the other page. Why can't we make that the same? So again, you have to maintain some flexibility, as in this case here. Yes, we have the grid on either side. Typically, people like to line up the box. I like to line up the text like this. So see, the word event kind of lines up on that left blue line there, and the box is sort of secondary. And it's the same over here. So what we can do is make this box here stay where it is. So see, let's go change the view again, screen mode to preview mode, and you sometimes have to go with the eyeball. But again, some people, depending on how many cooks you have in your kitchen, some people, let me change this. Some people will say, I don't like it like this. I want it lined up like this. You see, so it's that way or that way. It's sort of personal preference, and everyone has their different preference. But see what happens here is you have this space on the right doesn't line up with the space on the left. So do you center this whole box? You see how I did that before? You see how this space and this space look equilateral? This is what can be very, very challenging because people will look at this and say, something's wrong with the grid. It looks wonky. It looks different. But you can see this, again, is one of the many, many challenges of the layout process. What do we do here on this particular page? What I'm going to recommend, being that it's a chart, is I'm going to, again, you make a square box here. I'll make an equilateral square box over here. So you can see that the boxes line up. This actual chart lines up perfectly, sort of centered in that space. We're going to do that here. Let me change my view to go to preview mode. And since we have the space, I'm going to group these together, group this box together, and I'm going to scooch this down a little bit. Since we have the space, I'm going to kick this word down so that this line here at least doesn't go beyond there. Just so it looks lined up. And that's the challenge sometimes, is sort of making it look the best we can with what we have. So again, though, let me show you. See, this is a problem here where we have this one word down here. So we can continue to kick words down, but now it's starting to look unbalanced. You see what's happening? And then you might look at this and say, oh, look at all that space on the right. Something's wrong with the grid line. There's nothing wrong with the grid line. The grid line's the same. It's just a visualization of content in data. So now that I'm doing this, I'm thinking of going backwards on what I just said, and maybe just keeping it like this. I don't like that break either. You know, I mean, if you just change this just slightly, you see how it changes? Very, very sensitive. Again, because this is infographical text. This is not text written for a particular document. So that makes this very, very challenging. You basically have a page-by-page infographic instead of an actual ebook. So I'm going to keep that there. I'm going to scooch this up a little bit and go to regular preview mode and zoom out a little bit. And we're just going to keep it there, but that just kind of shows you, gives you an illustration, an idea of what's going on with these infamous blue lines and grid lines. So let's move on to another page here. Again, we have the blue lines set up here. The new grid is set up so that we can actually align this centered. And you can see now that this is every page. Remember, every page is affected from the beginning all the way through the end now. So now we have to go through page by page and make sure that this lines up. So now I'm going to kick this over right on the blue line. So we have the equal space on the left and an equal space on the right. But now you can see these little words are kicked over. So some people might say, that's what's going on. Hey, why can't we kick that word down over here? Well, let's try that. And what happens, in this case here, that's not terrible. In this case here, that actually works. But what happens often is this, is you'll kick it down and InDesign will decide for us that it wants to make these little widows down there. And a widow is like, you know, a solo word that sits down on its own. We don't want to do that either. And remember, we want this to be visually pleasing to the reader so that they can read it cleanly and simply. But we also want that to be correct as well. So again, down here now we have this quote. Again, all this content comes from an infographic. I wouldn't normally have all of this. So the challenge with layout is that we could have, this wasn't here. So now we have to say, oh, this infographic, we want to put all this here. Well, what the heck do you do with all this blank space? So we add a graphic. So the reason I added a graphic here is to kind of break up the content so that when you're reading this page that used to be an infographic, it was super simple. But now it's like, let's break it up a little bit and let's add this key statement down here. So it all pretty much lines up on the grid. Again, what you can do is change the flow. See, the words flow, but now it goes past the grid. You change it here, it now looks awkward. So you sort of kind of have to play around with it to kind of come up with a middle way. So let's try that. Now, the other thing you can do too, let me go back to the grid view, is you can take this image and you can knock those over right smack on the grid like that. We could do that as well, and it gives it sort of a grid feel. But see the difference in the image, in the visual? In the visual itself, it's like, look at the difference. So why not make use of some of that white space and make it bleed off? Now watch the difference. Boom, boom. See the difference in the image? It changes the whole look of the whole entire page. So that's another consideration when working with the grid layout. Let's move on to the next page now, because remember, everything we've done downstream or upstream is going to affect everything downstream. So let's move on to the next page. So now we have this next page, text box at the top, easy enough to kick over, and let's line that up on the new blue grid line. But you can see over here, this issue here, let's show you how we reflow the text here. See what's happening with the little widows on the left here, the word rate. Again, we're dealing with infographical text that's placed in a document, not flowing text. So we have to do our best to make this look right. We have one sentence up here. We have a paragraph here. Again, when you're writing for a document, it's usually flowing text, and a professional editor will write headlines that look more headline-ish for a document, and the text will actually flow more like this here. It'll be like one singular paragraph as opposed to two broken up statements. So that can make it very, very challenging. So writing and editorial content and the type of content is absolutely critical to whatever piece you're trying to design. In this case here, it's a hybrid, so we're going to try to do our best with this. So what do we do? So this here, what I'm going to do is make this text box. We have a decision to make. We can flow it out like this so it goes over the blue line. Or we have it flow down like this, but then what happens again is certain people will look at this and say, oh, it's off, the grid's off, it's not lined up, and they lose sleep over that. So what we're going to do is probably kick this over here like so that it just barely goes over the blue line. Again, it's not equilateral, because if you look at this now without the grid lines, which most people will see this as, you can see it doesn't line up. There's something off about it. Again, it's the text, right? Because it's not written for a ebook. So we have quite a challenge here working with these words. Do we continue to let it flow a little bit more like that? And then maybe kick the risk is lower than the standard risk. It just reads better. That's probably more appropriate. So I just want to show you the difference there. See here versus here. Here versus here. So that's an important consideration. So now this flows to there. I'd probably leave that there because I think it looks most professional. I'll probably scooch this up right on the blue line as to make everyone happy that it's all on the grid line. We're going to scooch this up here. But again, we have an issue. Again, this is infographical content. We have different content on all the pages. There's nothing consistent about this piece. So we have to do the best we can to line things up. Now, this bothers me here. As a designer, we want to make sure that things line up, right? So let's grab this stuff here, but not grab the images. And let's line the triangles up. You see how it does that right on the blue line, so that lines up nice and pretty on the left. Now again, we can go over here, way over to the right here. We can do that, but you see how it reads. If insurance is 7% of the cost of a 50 million project, see how it doesn't go together now? I like to have this together. Cost of a $50 million project. See what I mean? It's just how it reads. It just flows and reads better. So sometimes people get caught up with, oh, I want it to line up on one line or whatever. And you can't. You can't. It's going to reflow. It's going to reflow no matter what you do. So you want to make it as visually pleasing for the reader as possible. That's really important. So we'll do that here. I don't want to lose too much of my white space, and I don't want to make this image huge, but I might make it a teeny bit bigger. But what I'll probably do here is let's take this content and at least center it vertically in the box a little bit better, so it kind of takes up that space better. So that takes care of that page. Moving on to the next page here. Let's change this to grid view again so we can see the outlines. Let's move on to the next page because again, it's going to affect all of our pages. So this page here, we obviously have to change this, move this over on the grid on the left side here. Again, these are all components from an infographic. So this quote, this section was in the infographic. We're going to put that up here in a box just because it's going to read less like text and more like a standalone component. We have this stuff here, which again, what do you do with that now? So let's start by moving this over on our newly created left and right blue line. And this is actually pretty easy, this one here to fix, because everything kind of lines up within the grid. But let's move this gray box over to the blue line here. Oops, why isn't it cooperating? All right, let's try that again. There, we're gonna line that up on the blue line. And we're gonna drag this image, since there's nothing important on the right side, we're gonna line that up nice and pretty there. So it all lines up nice and pretty, equilateral that is, happy. We're going to view this, screen mode, preview. Yeah, everything lines up pretty nicely. So let's give this a little more breathing room actually. We're going to add a little bit more gray space here, like that. Again, these are all styles. So this style here, if I go to character styles, is character head 1. So it goes consistent throughout the whole document so that they're all the same and consistent. And then it looks professional and looks nice. So that page was actually pretty easy. On to the next page. That one was easy. Let's go over here now. Let's view this. Let's view this in grid view. Outline view. Again, we're going to kick this over to the proper grid line now that we've changed it. This one's pretty easy because again, this headline up here lines up before the blue line and all the text too. We can kind of play around with that a little bit more. But now again, if we try changing this to all caps, it goes way beyond the blue line. So that's why I changed the styles to lowercase. The reason I chose uppercase before was I was trying to pick up on their logo, make it all caps, but you can see how that becomes a problem. Great in an infographic, but not in a document. So we'll keep that upper lowercase. This one here, this part here, the text, I don't like how this all is all by itself anyway. So we're going to kick that over here for a second. Now, I think they wanted to make this its own paragraph like this. So we'll do that there. And then what I'll do is I'll play around with the text here and you see how again, it's going to reflow the way it needs to reflow. We might have to customize it, but that's not terrible. So you can see sometimes the word goes past that grid a little bit. So what do? If you try to kick that down, that's not terrible, but now you have this gap here. So do you add the 12 down here? And this is part of the customization part. So, for example, do you leave this here where it goes off the grid a teeny bit, or do you make it go within the grid and then you have spaces? Either way, it's less than the grid edge or it's more than the grid edge. So it's kind of like a game of cat and mouse. We have to chase back and forth to kind of perfect this a little bit. But you can see how everything's affected downstream. Now, this stuff here, again, we can line this up on the grid, but now it kicks way over on the right side. So see how it looks unbalanced now. So what do? Do you make that smaller to make it fit? But now it's smaller, now everything else has to get smaller. I vote no. In fact, I vote now that I'm looking at this, I'm going to make that a teeny bit larger, like so, and then maybe kick it over a little bit over here, and that means that all this other stuff here, I'm going to have that line up on the how, so it lines up with that headline up there. And then this here is sort of a standalone. I try to make the for line up over here. And then since it's a key statement, I'm going to make that a little bit larger here. So sometimes you have to flex a little bit. You have to bend a little bit with layouts. You can't be so literal with some of your layouts as a designer. And what do I mean by that? Well, we can't always stay perfectly on the grid line. No matter how neurotic some people get, you just can't do it. You just can't. You have to break outside of that. And what happens as a designer is you can do things like using a box that allows you to do that. So screen preview. And by the way, I tend to get neurotic as well here, so I'm speaking for everybody. I get very particular. I think we designers often do. Like, it has to be this way, it has to be that way. But see how this space here and this space here sort of kind of line up. I'm going to scooch that over just a little bit so it centers. But see how it centers in the box. The box now is outside of the grid because it's a different thing. In other words, it's not part of the grid, so it doesn't have to line up perfectly on the grid. It's inside of a box, so it's going to be treated a little bit differently. And I guess it would be the same with this here, with this little statement down here that they wanted to make a little bit bigger than our normal source text. Again, I'll try to line that up as best I can there with the text. And again, it lines up with the box, not necessarily on the blue grid. So that can be a challenge, but we can attain that by treating it in a box as a separate piece of information. Alrighty, let's move on to the next page here. We can still see the grid lines. And again, you can start to see where we have a variety of layout pieces, a variety of content on every page. Again, moving from an infographic to a document can be very challenging, but it's all doable. It just takes some more playing around with and some more work. This case here, we have this page here where we have case studies. Now we're going to take this sort of a piece at a time. We're going to bump this over to our new blue line on the left side so it lines up. We're going to take these boxes here and we're going to line them up on the grid lines as well, because it'll certainly fit within that. But what I'm going to do now is make sure that in both cases here, let me ungroup these, as I'm going to make the gray box go exactly on the blue line, this one here exactly on the blue line, so that at least I know that we're on the line. Oh, wait a second, over here we're not. This here, we want to make this go right to the blue line. And these are new lines. Before they were a little bit on the left side for different reasons, but we want to line that up as best we can here. Okay, so at least I know the gray boxes are correct. So now I'm going to go into screen mode, go to preview mode, and we're going to zoom in there so we can see a little bit closer of what we're looking at. Now this obviously needs to be scooched over, so I'm going to move that image over here. I'm going to move that over there so that's lined up. And then this stuff here, all the text and content is within the box, so I'm not too worried about that. Same with this one. This one, I'm going to move the image over to the left. I'm going to move the trim over to the right on that image there, and you see we have this black spot. That's not good. So I'm going to kick the inside image over a little bit, show a little bit more of the buildings. There we go. That's not bad. Okay, good. So let's zoom out. Now we have this new source, and I'm going to make that actually, I don't know whether I want to make it outside of the box or inside the box. So we have to make a decision. I'm going to put that, I'm I'm going to put that right on the outside of the box just because it's harder to read those sources, and I want to make that readability there. This blue thing is part of the image box, so we'll kick that up there. There, we'll do that there, and we'll do the same thing here. Now, I'm going to line this up on the box edge though, and I'm going to do the same over here, like that. Good. And now, so the text all lines up nicely. Text, everything there. I'm going to move this up a little, move this up a little. I double check everything, make sure there's no periods that shouldn't be there, things like that. Check capitalization. Okay, that looks good. Now, sometimes people will ask, they're like, well, why do you flow this down like this? Why doesn't it go across all the way to the edge? And there's a couple reasons for that. And so I'll show you what happens if we reflow this source line all the way across. It's like, oh, it doesn't quite fit. So do we go out to that edge? Look how silly that looks. It's sort of hanging off of there now. So we need to break it somewhere. And you never ever want to break a URL, a hyperlink. And that's the challenge here, is we have this huge hyperlink. So that's normally why I will do a break like this. So it says the source all the way through the name of data and analytics, and then the complete URL. The complete URL is right here. Otherwise, you're going to have a break and a hyphenation in the URL, which should make it an illegitimate URL. So that's the reason for keeping that there. So that's that page. To the final page in this series, in this document. Let's start right over here. Now, challenge number one here would be that the client wants to have this be smaller, less significant on the page, more like a call out. They did say that we could put it on the previous page, which obviously isn't going to happen. There's just way too much going on these pages. They're really crammed full of data and content. So she did say that we could remove it. So we'll probably remove it. We could always put it back. One of the options might be that we can do something like we did up here, somewhat of a call out kind of approach on this last page. And put that up top just like we did on the other page and change it to a call out view kind of thing. That's a possibility, but it sounded like they wanted to make it less important and did say we could remove it if it's not possible, which will allow us to really focus on having sort of a call out or a sign off signature, if you will, for this particular client. This here is a URL box, by the way. So what you can do in Adobe InDesign is you can go to create an hyperlink. You can do a lot of different things with InDesign, but this is a hyperlink box. So we can move that out of our way if we want to edit this. So for example, let me go to screen mode, preview. You can't see this, it's invisible, but so let me keep that out of the way, because the challenge here is this. See this little hyphenated word, construction trained? That can be a bit of a bugger, only because keeping in the grid lines, see that hyphenation, I could make full use of the page, which I think it looks better, but it creates a new situation. See how it reflows? We don't want that bolded forward to be there, so, and we don't want that broken hyphen. So now we have this awkward space up here after by. I could kick this down here, but now it looks all out of whack. It flows really, really weird. So sometimes as designers, we have to make these decisions to make it look as best we can. It's like working with clay. We have to reshape it and make decisions based on that actual page. We're going to put the URL box back over there so that what happens is when you create the PDF, you click it and people can go to their website directly. So that would be the last page, which isn't bad because it's nice and clean. After all of this content that you're reading, you end on a nice, slick, clean page. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to go through it with you with the basics of blue guidelines and showing you how challenging it can be, but we can certainly come up with what I call the middle way, a solution that works for everybody. And hopefully that addresses this and we'll be good to go.